The painter feels a need that we're not aware of until it's satisfied in art. One kind of painter shows us the common lot of mankind, material, moral, visual, as Masaccio did. That kind of painter shows a condition that we recognize as our own. Modern Europe found itself in the rational truthfulness of art. Painting may fill a need that is common, but the painter's impulse must have been quite personal. A certain fulfillment is only achieved by this one artist, no one else. Art has to change in order to remain art. If it keeps transforming itself, why do we recognize it as art? Because it identifies for us an impulse that we come to know in ourselves. The beauty is a fulfillment. An inward need has been satisfied. We don't know much about Vermeer. We only know 27 perfect pictures that are undoubtedly the work of his maturity. They were painted at the rate of perhaps 2 a year before he died at the age of 43, insolvent. No one knows who this woman is, or whether Vermeer ever painted his wife, but he did paint the same girl more than once, and he surely wasn't indifferent to his models. Before Vermeer, we didn't know how complex the perceptions of ordinary life and domestic relationships could be, would have to be, if they were to accommodate the tension of actual feeling in its real surroundings. Will one ever come close to another person? That's the dilemma that Vermeer formulated for some of us forever. After him, we know that our feelings pull both ways. The tension of visual intimacy is not easy to deal with, but the vision it shapes is beautiful. Vermeer left few traces of his life in the archives. He was born in the small Dutch town of Delft, and on the last day of October 1632 was baptized into the Reformed Church at the Nieuwekerk in the Market Square. 21 years later, Johannes Vermeer was received into the Painters' Guild, and in a civil ceremony in the town hall at the other end of the same square, married a Catholic girl from Gouda called Katharina. He seems to have lived all his life in Delft. He married and died within a few hundred yards of his birthplace. He was buried in the old church, and the brief entry in the register notes that 8 children who survived him were all underage. In Vermeer's time, Delft was a quietly busy, conservative town, prosperous still, but past its heyday, perhaps a little on its dignity, in that phase of fading grandeur that oddly enough in one or two places produced the great painting of the age. Delft was the old centre of government, and here Prince William of Orange led the movement towards Dutch independence. Here he was assassinated less than 50 years before Vermeer was born. Delft was a judicious, prudent town with a refinement and a neat domestic style that you still notice. It inspired in 3 or 4 painters pictures with the same modest, measured refinement. We can deduce something of the impression that Vermeer made in his town. We hear of public respect, professional eminence, and we know that 1 or 2 people, including the local baker, eagerly collected the pictures that he evidently found so hard to paint. There are hints of aloofness and disdain. When a French collector who didn't bother to visit Rembrandt made a detour to see him, Vermeer refused to show him any pictures, though he certainly owned at least one. Vermeer's paintings are usually quite small, and the lacemaker, which is a fraction over 8 inches across, is the smallest. But there's nothing modest about them. They are proudly immaculate, as no one else's pictures are. There's even a touch of ostentatious glitter in the way the silks and bobbins are seen as shining beads of light. In the jewel-like perfection, we become aware of an intensity that is enigmatic. To us, the seeing is extraordinarily authentic. We can't doubt that we are shown how things really looked. Yet when we come to look through this artist's eyes, we begin to doubt whether the paint describes anything. We are quite close to this lacemaker, and yet she remains distant. There is no exchange of glance between model and painter, none of the normal signals of mutual recognition. Instead of the rhythms which give a face its personal force, its expression, those minutely shaped S-curves which are the drawing, there is only the mosaic of light and absence of light. This is what is recorded with almost inhuman perfection. In the lacemaker, in place of intimacy, there is an apparent impersonality, which is in fact one of the rarest and most personal things in the whole of art. That's the paradox of Vermeer's painting. And to understand anything of it, we must go back to the beginning of a puzzling, fascinating story. The starting point is a surprise. We meet Vermeer first as a highly ambitious young man, making audacious lunges at the different international styles of the day. In the early Baroque style, originated by Rubens, he painted Christ in the house of Martha and Mary. It's the first picture of his that we know. He was gifted with an awareness that painting of quality was made out of light and color. Then, in the Dutch Venetian style, he painted the toilet of Diana. In these early paintings, he was willing to tackle life-size figures. He wasn't deterred by the demands which the trend of Dutch naturalism made on the artists of his time, the last generation of confident Dutch bourgeois painters before the school declined. At the age of 24, he dated a picture for once, when he painted a tavern that was more like a brothel. It was too animated and too crowded to be studied to the standard that Dutch naturalism at its peak required. The picture is entitled The Procuress, after the woman who oversees the transactions. A good time is had by all, except that one of her visitors seems more aware of himself than the goods on offer. We catch his sidelong glance, as if he were looking self-consciously in a shop window or in a mirror. It's the glance of a painter who's doing a self-portrait. His grin is slightly unhappy. For some reason, he's not at ease. The young man had bitten off more than he could chew. The way to chew this intractable material was to study it from life. For a start, he painted a picture in the best established style that could be based on a posed model, the style of Rembrandt. The Girl Asleep must have been precious to him as the picture in which he discovered the subject and the method that suited him, his patient and studied tribute to the patience of a woman's life. At last, Vermeer could devote himself to the problem of embodying a girl in paint, and it was a vexing one. In the event, the way he painted the girl, the roundness and the natural substance, modeling the flesh continuously through cool light into warm dark, borrowed indirectly from Rembrandt, still left Vermeer uncomfortable. The still life, so far from setting a standard for life painting, half buried it. We begin to wonder if the humanness of the model is the cause of the trouble. The girl is tucked away behind her table, secluded in her slumber, alive yet isolated from life and separated, as you can see in this X-ray, even from the spaniel dog who was originally to keep her company in the doorway, but got painted out. All the positive qualities of the girl asleep, the richness, the approachability, the attractiveness, had to be frustrated and checked in some way. If the fortification had failed, if the table of fruit had caved in and revealed the girl's whole figure in her shining dress, or if the dog had come wagging back round the door, even if there was still, as there once was, a man in the next room to maintain a living exchange, then the picture would have been ruined. The nature of realism changes in every age. Vermeer must have been realistic about the needs of his own temperament. He had examined and rejected the grand conventions of 17th century painting. The only one left to serve his purpose was the most basic formulation of all, the household interior. The confusion of the early pictures was replaced by a simple presence, stationed exactly to catch the light and defined so clearly that we never forget it. For Vermeer, it involved a drastic clarification and concentration, and also an odd reversal. The ambitious juvenile pictures had one thing in common, apart from painterly talent: they all revolved round the figure of a woman who was sitting, kneeling, stooping, or leaning. So the letter reader is still barricaded behind furniture with rumpled carpet, highly modelled fruit, though she is quite small in the space and inconspicuous in the picture, showing only her mousy profile. She can stand up. It's a liberation both for her and her painter. She's the first of the standing women who recur throughout his work. They are painted most often like this, alone, secluded like a treasure. They are his most private subject, most admired, most loved. The sign of Vermeer's genius wasn't the spectacular experiments, but his instinctive recognition that the essence of painting for him was the simple business of painting the model. For Vermeer it was not simple. The world of the letter reader, closed by the curtain which we might suppose to be hanging over the canvas, contains itself, as a lot of rather commonplace Dutch pictures do. But here the illusion, instead of inviting us in, holds us apart. What we believe in is not material proximity, but distance. It is the simplicity that convinces us, the refined economy of space and height. With one clue fewer, without the reflection in the window pane, for instance, we might doubt whether the body beyond the sleeve had any real volume. This perilous reduction conveys something at which we could hardly have guessed. It shows how the image and its painter can in quite a new sense be at peace with themselves. The separateness in his first letter reader was implied in what he painted. When he returned to the subject, perhaps 7 years later, it was enshrined in how he painted. What was counterfeited now was not tangible material, but the impalpable world of sight alone, in essence unknowable and apart. We are shown nothing but light. The differences of light tell everything. Nothing is tangible, nothing is explained. He has lighted on a wholly original account of how the world is really seen. Naturalism, the characteristic Dutch style, was a way of describing tangible material, as if it could be touched. Vermeer discovered an alternative as faithful as any naturalistic style and more objective, far more detached. All that the eye can receive is light. The camera obscura, the 17th century astronomers knew, was essentially the same as the camera we know. But enclosed in a portable box, the image could be copied with brush and color. The camera obscura gave Vermeer an illusion as magical as any, yet dispensed with literal detail. Its beauties must have enchanted him more and more. But before he could paint people like this, he turned in another direction and eventually produced the marvelous view of his own town. He painted his picture indoors so he could use on landscape the method he was developing in his studio. He looked out of a window on Hurricada across the basin called De Kolk towards the now vanished Rotterdam gate of the town with the new church beyond. He could just see the tip of the old church spire, as we still can, though almost all the other buildings he saw have been altered or pulled down. No previous landscapes had approached this complete dependence on the visual data for a given view. In the view of Delft, it was as if picturesque convention had never existed, as if landscape had never been centered on its human inhabitant and the human appetite for descriptive illustration. Vermeer was certainly aware of the departure, but in this debate between vision and thing, material things didn't abandon their claims without a struggle. In this painting, their claims were too strong. He jettisoned consistency of handling and decided to match not the optical impression, but the differing physical stuff of the world. So, the sky was painted cloudily. The stone and brick were painted crisply with their own sharp textures. The moist luster on the tarred planks of barges was painted differently, again in separate, limpid touches. The water of the Kolk, by contrast, was rendered with a bleary liquid streakiness, inhospitably wet, and ruffled just a little by as light a breeze as might be. Finally, the near bank, peopled with figures no bigger than they appeared on his screen, was painted in coarse strokes of sandy ochre, diagonally brushed and left unsoftened. It was paint as stiff and almost as obviously paint as the young Van Gogh would use. So we have 5 invented equivalents for the material consistencies of the view spread across the breadth of the canvas. The actuality was realized with Vermeer's instinctive naturalness, implicitly faithful as nothing else in landscape painting before the 19th century. Here at Delft, near to Vermeer's window, he seems quite close. With the view of Delft in mind, one looks across the streaky grey ripples towards shadowed buildings. Not entertaining, you may think. You need a lifetime to appreciate a northern city like Delft or London. Nothing could interpret an urban world with its usual weather and familiar spirit more closely than this picture. When he painted this, the optical key which opened the environment to Vermeer seemed to be admitting him to a whole world of natural richness. He outlined a servant pouring milk with his camera, then modeled the form from life. Looking at the materials around her, he lost the surface details in a crust of incandescence. He seized on the points of light with rapture. These spots of paint are scattered like an independent luster. Do the glistening lights and weighty modeling really come together? The human agreement that a painter is in search of is nearer than ever. Yet it is still intended, and it still eludes him. When Vermeer's optical method appears fully developed, the description of material things is replaced by one homogeneous code of light. He records nothing but the code of light, as if his canvas were an impartial retina. The code of light gives the painter his unique detachment and leaves the girl, too, in a world of her own. Still quietly companionable and anchored to her unobtrusive occupation, but withdrawn, as if in a reverie, which sets her and the painter free. Free for the perilous exchange of presences, without which there is no painting from life. The music lesson is the most oblique, least palpable exchange that has ever been painted. The woman stands at the keyboard of a handsome virginals inscribed music, companion of joy, remedy for grief. Her back is turned to us, her fingers rest on the keys, but we don't know if she is playing. There's no sign of her disposition, except the slightest turn of her head towards a man who's watching her. He's come in from the street. He still carries his cane, and it's fair to judge that he waits her pleasure or seeks his own, though impossible to guess which. On the floor, a viol is ready for a duet. The bow resting under the bridge is an emblem. The harmony in which the couple join will be intimate. Is that all there is in this suspended moment, plotted as if on a graph against the ebony rectangles of the floor and the furniture? The private heart of the painting is in the mirror. In the reflection, beyond the table, we can see an easel. Behind the easel, there should be a painter. The picture revolves round the paradox that life painting always implies one more participant than it portrays, a witness, a painter who was present. But behind this easel we see not a painter, but a box. I suspect that Vermeer has shown us the actual camera obscura which introduced him to the new kind of image, like that in the mirror here. So the painter was present, but he was masked in optical inscrutability. What was happening in this incident apparently intimate, potentially erotic, yet inactive, and as it turns out, not private at all. Whatever it was that the two people illustrated, they were in fact posing to be painted, and were intended to be seen as posing, since the painter implied his own presence. To the right of the man, a picture is hanging. We can see only part of it, but it shows a prisoner who is bound, like a commentary on the spellbound man in front. Is he in thrall to the woman? I think both man and woman are in thrall to the new and magical kind of painting. Vermeer developed the suggestion of the music lesson in a painting called The Concert. He very gently explored the new medium of embodiment. The visual mosaic becomes an equal comradeship of colors. Canary yellow, oyster grey, that salmon pink which is Vermeer's alone. Buff, the sword belt dovetailed with the chair back, and powder blue are all tuned together to the dove grey wall. No person touches another. Eyes hardly meet. No one encroaches on anyone's separateness. The heart of Vermeer's subject, with its complex meaning, was now within the compass of his art. So little of the particular is specified in this portrait. Where was the edge of the nose, or the corner of the mouth? The light really fell across this face more suddenly, more decisively. The edges have been rounded and smoothed until the sharpness has dissolved. The pearl that she wears is her appropriate symbol. The whole image has taken on the property of a pearl. It is as if some piercing fragment of feeling, one unforeseen meeting of glance, had got inside the painter's defenses. Something intimate, almost uncomfortably direct, in the look of a certain girl, was covered in this pearly shell of style. Nothing in painting meant more to Vermeer than the coming together of model and painter alone. This was the theme of Vermeer's great allegory, which he called the art of painting. It is the most complex of his pictures. It's at once a real room, the familiar first floor back in the old house on the Grote Markt, a symbolic manifesto of the philosophy of his art, and also a reflection of its private essence, its subtle relation to its human subject, all fused perfectly together in light. Though a picture means 1,000 things, it remains single and simple. This studio scene certainly doesn't show us how Vermeer painted his pictures. The old Burgundian costume, which he surely didn't wear to paint in, must refer to the historic greatness of art. The map shows the Netherlands in its heroic age. The model, with the trumpet, the gilded wreath, and the book of fame, is the muse of history, who both inspires painting and makes it immortal. The muse is an enchanting girl. She invites his attention and as tenderly wards it off. Her delicacy is protected by the stiff silk that she gathers about her like armor. The impersonal quality that her emblems confer is also a precaution that the calm of the room won't be disturbed by the intimacies of life. As always in Vermeer's world, the painter is inscrutable. To supply an element whose lack would be felt, a man's face does appear a plaster cast. It's as if some of this painter, whoever he is, the heroic part of him, lay slain and dismembered under the muse's glance. It's a picture of equilibrium. Action and passivity are balanced. Tradition and originality too. The delicate opposition is Vermeer's real subject. His masterpiece, and how typically the smallest of his pictures, The Lace Maker, is the product of exactly this balance. The epigrams of light convey everything. Close to us, they have a polished brilliance. Only inches away, yet deeper in space where its beloved inhabitant is discovered, the touch is gentler, yet still precise. The sky itself is a measure of distance, not only physical, but emotional too. We come to know, with wonderful intimacy, not so much the model herself as the tension of feeling that draws us to her, yet holds her apart. Vermeer's pictures are about two things: women and art. Both prompted a drive as imperative as I know of in any painter. The institution of art and the achievement of the generation before him prompted the drive towards a perfection that was impeccable and unchallengeable. The spell of a woman found him vulnerable, but it was his inspiration. His tribute was linked with the discernment of a statue, a magnetic force without which the image of a woman was incomplete. The value of Vermeer is not only that his pictures are scarce and wonderful, there is an inherent completeness in the image which is out of reach of other painters. Something very rare had happened. Where other men struck a genial balance, Vermeer had to take the scales apart. His method was a retreat to the elemental level on which alone his problem could be solved. Finally, it's for the weight of feeling, freshly and perfectly suspended, that we value his achievement. For him, tenderness and detachment alike are qualities of love.